our future. When I was your age, I did German A-level, and we learned about the subjunctive mood, which is not a tense. Subjunctive is about possibility, it's about what might happen. And so I often think about this when thinking about innovation. Innovation isn't just about thinking about the future, innovation is a mood of possibility. And so we're going to think a little bit like innovators this morning. But the thing I quite often find myself having to be is Janus face. So those of you who are classicists will know that Janus is the Roman god that has a face looking into the future and a face looking into the past. So I'm often having to think about the past in order to think about the future. So have those two ideas in mind, the subjunctive mood and being Janus face. So I want to think about work and time, the relationship between the two, and how that's changed. And basically what I'm going to say is that the relationship between time and work has always been to do with the technology available. But that the technology that is developing now is going to provoke a new relationship between time and work. So, for the largest part of human history, how many hours a week of work has been dependent on nature. And I often like thinking, how many hours did a hunter-gatherer have to work per week? And did he go home at 4:30 on a Friday? How many hours did a hunter-gatherer have to work every week in order to fill his belly and fill the belly of his family? And if we think about work, for example, in the Middle Ages, people were working when there was enough light. They were working when certain tasks demanded it. Work could be task-based, not based on hours. And of course, you know, when it was dark, when it was winter, what jobs there were to do would be different. The counterexample to that in the West was actually the Christian monastic tradition, which had a 24-hour tradition of work. So the Bull of St. Benedict prescribed ora et labora, prayer and work, and that was the mode by which people went about their days, and included prayer at night. So really, if we start thinking about working hours, maybe that's the first place we start to see it. But when the Industrial Revolution came along, everything kind of changed. And when people started working not on the land, but in factories, and in a coordinated way to produce products that had to be made by many people and not just by one, people needed to be in factories at a certain time. They needed to get there at a certain time. They needed to go home at a certain time. So even though they were still paid per piece that they made, frequently that actually meant that they had to have working hours for the first time and in a kind of new way. The other thing that happened that changed our relationship with time forever was the invention of the railways. So it used to be that it didn't matter that it was 1 o'clock in Bristol at a slightly different time, that it was 1 o'clock in London. And the reason that didn't matter was because people weren't travelling really between the two. And when you went from one to the other, you could just adjust to the fact that it's now 1 o'clock in Bristol rather than 1 o'clock in London. But when you've got a railway, a train going from one to the other, you need to be able to know what time you're leaving and what time you're getting there. So the trains led to a standardisation of time. And those were the sort of two seeds that were planted that meant that we started having a concept of hours of work. Rather than tasks of work, hours of work. And that's where we get a lot of our idioms to do with work from. Like the idea of the 9 to 5, the idea of burning the midnight oil. They're all based on the idea that there are times that we should be working and times that we should not be working. But lots of things have happened to actually change how we interact with time and work. So in 1994, for example, there were changes to the Sunday trading rules. That meant that it was okay for shops and businesses to operate on a Sunday in the way that they weren't allowed to operate on a Sunday before. And effectively, what that meant was that working on a Sunday became something that was much more possible. And now a fifth of people work regularly on Sunday, and about half of people will sometimes work on Sunday. So it's broken down that sense that there are times we work and times that we don't. And of course, with the fact that now the equipment most of us need for work fitting into a bag that we can take home, and us having internet access at home, it means that there really isn't a place or a time where people cannot work. People can go home, they can pick up their emails in bed, they can draft reports sitting on their sofa. So where and when you work has become much, much more flexible. And of course, when the pandemic happened, that meant that it changed our relationship with work, time and home in a way that was quite decisive. But something is changing that is of a qualitatively different kind. So there are three kinds of AI that we're talking about a lot at the moment. We're talking about generative AI, which is AI that can produce a response to an input that is unique and which draws on a large language model. Using that technology, we can create assistants. So those are AI that can generate a response based on certain tasks and sort of do certain tasks for us. The natural conclusion to that is AI agents. And AI agents are different from AI assistants because AI agents can work autonomously on a certain kind of work. You will work with agents. You will have colleagues that are AI and colleagues that are human. This is the development that's happening right now, and it definitely will be part of how you're interacting with others in your working life. So, what does that mean for time? Because obviously an AI agent doesn't need to pick up a kid from nursery. An AI agent doesn't need to visit its mother in a care home. An AI agent doesn't need to eat. An AI agent doesn't need to sleep. The limits on these agents are largely, I guess, cost and processing limits. It's what we've got the processing power for, it's what we can afford to do. And I guess there's a sustainability point as well, which is that these take a huge amount of computing power. What does this mean for our relationship with work and time? With AI agents that can work at any time, in any place, and for any number of hours, does that mean we work even more? Does it mean that any sort of sense that there's a time and a place where we need not be working is broken down? Or could it lead to a different future? Well, here's one vision. In ancient Greece, we saw the birth of philosophy. By philosophy, we really meant the development of all sorts of academic disciplines. So by philosophy, we also kind of include the natural sciences, physics, mathematics, all of those things that developed at that time. And the question is, why were those able to develop at that time? Well, what was going on at that time was that a huge amount of the work that was being done in ancient Athens was being done by slaves. So effectively, that then freed up certain classes of people to be able to be at leisure to learn, to think, to innovate, to develop. You'll remember that the word school comes from the Greek word for leisure. And so the idea was that learning was about something that you did when you had free time. Now, could it be that in a future where a huge amount of work can be done by people whose work is not limited to a particular time or place, and who don't run out of energy and don't need to have a life outside of work, that we could, in some way, bring about a new Athenian way of living, where we can be spending the time thinking and learning and developing and innovating. Now, how this goes, how this develops, and fundamentally what your working lives look like is down to policymakers, leaders of now and of the future, and that's you. to define how we relate with one another, how we relate to time. So I'd suggest that that's something that we worth thinking about. Thank you.